Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
And greetings. Thank you so much for joining me, Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. Today, I am so happy to have on board as our guest, Nurse Linda Smith. Linda Smith is a master's degree and board-certified holistic nurse and also certified in healing touch and in clinical aromatherapy. She has a private practice and teaches both energy healing and aromatherapy around the world. She helps clients to discover what is not working in their own life on a physical, mental, and emotional and spiritual level. And she helps them find the balance needed to restore health in all forms, the power of energy healing and essential oils. Linda is the author of an amazing array of books, including Hildegard de Bingen-Holistic Approach to Wellness. You can find Linda at transformationalwellnessservices.com. Thank you so much for joining us today, Linda Smith.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Ellen.
Now, I want to share with our listeners how I found you, because I actually was researching Hildegard de Bingen, and I found that you actually offer, along with your many other wonderful books, a really great book called Hildegard de Bingen, and maybe you'll tell me how to pronounce that correctly.
De Bingen.
Holistic Approach to Wellness. So it was exactly what I was trying to find out about: the herbal therapies, the gemstone therapies, the aromatherapy, all the things we talk about in newer type healing right now. She was doing, how long ago was that?
1,000 years ago.
1,000, not 100, 1,000 years ago. And I have been so impressed with her work. But when I found your work, you got seriously involved with her and actually went and traveled where she had walked.
That's right. Yes.
How did that happen for you?
Well, first of all, let me just tell you a little tell your listeners a little bit about who Hildegard really is. She was the 10th child of a noble family. And in those days, you had to tithe 1/10 of everything, including your children, to the church. And so when she was age 8, her parents dropped her off at the doorstep of a male abbey. And I can just imagine the abbot kind of scratching his head like, what am I going to do with a little girl? And the thought hit him, yes, I have this anchoress who's like a widow who was a very wealthy widow who had a little room attached to the outside wall of the Abbey Church, and her role was to spend her life in prayer. And he thought, I'll just put this little girl in there with Jutta, this elderly, wise woman. And it didn't take very long before Hildegard confided in this holy woman that she heard voices, and she had been hearing voices since she was age 3. And the holy woman, of course, said, voices? Remember, this is the beginning of the burning times. And this is not cool for a child to say, I'm hearing voices. And so she went to the abbot, and the abbot said, I don't want to lose the dowry. And so just teach this child how to read and write, and tell her to write down everything the voices say. So she did. And years go by, and at this point, the abbot realizes, oh my God, we have volumes now of theology and philosophy, of medical science that this child was taking down as dictation from these voices. And the child always contributed the voices to the voice of God. Okay,
so I just want to backtrack 1 minute there, because I just want to tell our listeners that you are listening to Linda Smith, and she is a master's degree nurse, board-certified holistic nurse. She is our guest today, and we're talking about her book and other work that she has done, Hildegard de Bingen-Holistic Approach. And also, just tell us, what are the burning times for those who might have caught that?
Well, the burning times, of course, were the burning of witches at the stake. And anyone who had knowledge, intuition, or whatever was suspect. And so hearing voices would not be a cool thing in that age. You certainly wouldn't, if you heard voices, you certainly wouldn't tell anybody about that. And so anyway, this abbot takes her writings and gives it to a very famous monk of the day and says, take a look at this stuff and tell me if it's okay. Well, the monk was Bernard of Clairvaux, who happened to have the ear of the Pope. And he read stuff and went, wow, this is really good. So he told the Pope to give this woman a blessing. Now, what that meant was, from then on, nobody really could touch her because she had the blessing of the church. And she, of course, became a Benedictine nun, just like all the girls who were brought as gifts of dowry. They all became nuns there. Well, years and years go by, and you have to understand that the monks, of course, had very nice accommodations. The women were all in 3 tiny, tiny little rooms that were attached to the outside wall of the Abbey church. And so when the holy woman died, the women who were there, they elected Hildegard to be their spokesperson to the abbot. Well, the first thing Hildegard did was she got them all out of the 3 tiny little rooms, and each day she would walk them over to the hospice. Now, the hospice was on the grounds of the abbey, and a hospice is a place of hospitality, because in those days, people did not have doctors that they could go to, so if they were sick, they went on pilgrimage to the holy places where, some saint met their demise. And so people were on the road all the time going to holy places seeking healing. And they would travel between abbey to abbey seeking hospitality. And so there was this huge 3-story building right on the grounds. In fact, the outside walls of that hospice are still standing to this day.
And you have pictures of it right in your book.
Yes, I do. Yes. And what they would do is they would on the ground floor, that's where they would hang up all their herbs, and they would store things they raised for food, and they would store those there for the winter. Hildegard would take her nuns over to the hospice. Now, you have to understand, Benedictines would take a vow of hospitality, meaning that the pilgrims, if they got sick, they would have to stay. Well, not only them, but their whole entourage, whoever they were traveling with. And that meant that the abbey had to feed them. And that was very expensive. And so Hildegard went over there. She would say, "What is your problem?" And they would say, "Oh, well, I hurt my leg." And she would look at the leg. She would write out a prescript. In other words, she would diagnose their problem, write out a medical script, hand it to her nuns. They would mix up tinctures of wines, beers, brandies. Remember, water's not safe to drink. And ointments and salves and all this. And they would get the person well, and they'd have to leave. And so they would go down the road, and they'd meet people coming the opposite direction, and they'd say, "Hey, if you're sick, go to Hildegards." And so her fame as a healer spread all over the known world. And that's because of people always on pilgrimage.
And so amazing, because I did, in my presentation, actually followed a lot of the recommendations that she actually wrote down. She was also an author, a musician, and she wrote down those protocols that you're discussing.
That's right.
Nurse Smith. And they actually now, what I did was I documented in current scientific literature where we now understand the mechanism of action of how many of those plants worked.
I actually have an entire bookshelf of all the books that I've been able to find in English, because unfortunately, I don't read in other languages. And there is a marvelous book written by a couple of German physicians. I'm looking on my shelf right now to see if I can find it. And it's a book on looking at Hildegards medicine, really looking at it from the standpoint of, did it really work? And what they found was that not only did it work, but it's useful this very day. So there's a clinic in Germany, and it's run by one of those physicians, and they practice Hildegards medicine over there.
It's just amazing. And I want to take a little break right here. And when we come back, we're going to continue on Herbally Yours. And I'd like you to know you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Listen live online at nccradio.org or on iHeartRadio. For more information on today's guest or topic, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. Stay tuned. Herbally Yours. We'll be right back.
Hey, y'all. Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know, because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
And welcome back to more right here on Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College. And if you're interested in learning more about herbal medicine, which is so well documented in mainstream medical literature, and which we're talking about the practice of being many thousands of years old, we're talking about a master herbalist here, and that was Hildegard de Bingen, and she did it over 1,000 years ago. You can just look us up at naturalnurse.com and go to calendar, and you will see all the walks we do right outside where we gather and identify wild, edible, and medicinal plants right in our area. And we're so happy to have on board with us today Linda Smith. Now, Linda, you have a long list of attributes after your name. You are obviously highly trained medical professional, a nurse, as well as a board-certified holistic nurse, as I am. What led you, after being conventionally trained in nursing medicine, what led you to have such a focus on natural?
Well, let's see. I think we have to go back to probably the 1980s. I was working as a critical care nurse in a hospital in Ohio, and I had muscle spasms in my neck. And, of course, the treatment for muscle spasms, the only one that doctors knew at that time, was to inject the spasms with lidocaine. Well, that sets up an inflammatory process, and then that's supposed to like break the process. Well, I kept doing that with doctors, and I wasn't getting any better. And I remember going to down to Cincinnati to visit, and somebody said, "Oh, you should see this chiropractor." And I went, "Oh, excuse me." I said, "I'm a highly trained professional ICU nurse. I am not going to a chiropractor." And but I had 3 different people recommended the same chiropractor to me, and I thought, well, geez, what have I got to lose? So I went, and I kid you not, at the interview with this doctor, I said, let's just lay the cards on the table. I said, I'm a highly trained medical professional, and you are a quack. And I said, but I see on the wall that you have lots of certificates for lots of medical things. And he said, and then he proceeded not just to laugh at me, but he talked only science to me. And I thought, gosh, maybe there is something to this chiropractic. Anyway, I ended up being a client of his for a number of years, and of course got past my, muscle spasms in my neck. And this chiropractor at one point recommended a few supplements, and I would take supplements, and it would take care of whatever was, my problem at the time. And so that kind of eased me into being open to that sort of thing. Then, when in graduate school, a flyer was put in my mailbox, and it was for the American Holistic Nurses Association. And they had a student rate. And, of course, being a poor graduate student, it's like, of course, I'm going to do a student rate. And the very first newsletter came was announcing that they were having a convention in Colorado. Well, I really wanted to go to Colorado. I've never been there before. And so the day before I was supposed to go, I was in a bad car wreck. And I had a terrible whiplash. But everything else, was okay. My car was totaled, but I thought, I am going to Colorado. And so by the time I get out there, I am in so much pain. But they had a episode, one of the offerings at the convention was a Nurture the Nurse time. And one of the offerings was massage. And I thought, oh, great, I'll do massage. Well, they were not doing massage. They were doing what I now know as healing touch, which is working with the energy field. And and the way energy works is that you clear or balance the energy field, the body will right itself. It will match what's in the field. And, of course, that helped me greatly, and I was just so enthralled with that. I was just like really open to it. And I remember I was halfway through my graduate work in home health care administration, and I talked to some of the board members of AHNA, and I said, how do I change my major and go into holistic nursing? And they laughed at me and they said, look, honey, there aren't any real programs at that time in holistic nursing. Just do what we did, and that is get the piece of paper with the graduate degree on it, and then do your real study. And I went, okay, well, that makes sense. And when I graduated, the job that I ended up with was being a director of a hospice. And I liked that because it had one foot in both worlds, in allopathic medicine, which I was quite trained in, and in a type of medicine that was open to looking at emotional issues, spiritual issues, and offering those kinds of services equal to the physical services. And so that's really kind of how I started drifting into that. And then the opportunity came to actually learn about healing touch. And I became a healing touch practitioner, then an instructor. and eventually was asked to move to Colorado and become the first administrator for the Healing Touch program.
What a great story. And I want to remind our listeners, you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse. And today, my guest is Nurse Linda Smith, who is sharing with us lots of information. We spoke about Hildegard de Bingen. We talked about Linda's path towards holism and holistic nursing. And now, you used the word hospice yet again.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
It's interesting where we're looking at healing. Now, tell us about how aromatherapy, you're really an expert, and I do want people to visit your website at transformationalwellnessservices.com, because you bring in a lot of spirituality, you bring in philosophy, you bring in all kinds of healing practice to those who want to consult with you in person or by phone, and you incorporate energy medicine and aromatherapy as well.
Yes. And, if people go to that website, they will find that I have formed this business now with my husband, and we are both certified Dream Builder coaches. We are certified through the Life Mastery Institute, and so we're able to help people find what it is that they most would love in their life. And then it's like there's 4 quadrants that we help people to identify that in health and well-being, in relationships, in vocation or what it is that you want to accomplish in the world, and then time and money freedom. And so we help people to really improve their lives through discovering what it is that they most would love. And a part of that is in that health and well-being. And what I do for people who are able to come here is I offer general health assessment as well as energy healing and aromatherapy.
Tell us a little bit about the aromatherapy piece, because we haven't talked about that.
Well, actually, this developed when I was a number of years ago when I started my own program in energy healing called Healing Touch Spiritual Ministry. And that's based on how the early Christians were actually healing, and they were healing through prayer and through prayer or intention and laying on of hands. And that's what I had in my program until someone challenged me and they said, you're not doing enough in your program. The early Christians were also anointing. And so that took me in a whole nother direction. And the more I studied, the more I had this aha. That's why they were so successful and known as the healing community, is because they were actually using 3 forms of vibrational healing. And because how does prayer or intention work? It's actually through frequency. And how does laying on of hands work? It's through vibrational frequency. And how do the oils work? Okay, pure essential oils, not the ones that are made in a chemistry lab, but the pure oils that are actually made from the plants are living substances that carry a vibrational frequency. So that's how I kind of got into aromatherapy, is by teaching it.
That is excellent. And so many people really bringing all that together. You are really a historian and an author. You've written so many books, Linda. I mean, I remember I asked you, so did you write a book? And you said, how many did you say you wrote?
It's about 40.
Right. Well, that's, that is really, really interesting. Mm-hmm. Your first book, Healing and Reclaiming Our Judeo-Christian Legacy of Healing Touch.
Right.
That's amazing. And then, of course, the one I used to find you was the book on Hildegard, which was very, very in-depth, because you have an amazing story of traveling there and actually doing a lot of your own photography. Very original work.
Well, thank you. I really, actually, that was many years ago that I traveled there, and at the time, I knew nothing about aromatherapy. I was looking at Hildegards' story of being a famous healer. And once and then years later when I learned about essential oils, I went back and looked at my materials again. I went, oh my God, this was there and I missed it.
Isn't that's just fascinating?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being our guest today. And we're talking to Linda Smith, RN, MS, HNBC, CHTP, CCA, a master's degree nurse, a board-certified holistic nurse, a prolific author, and a spiritual healer. You can find out more about her at transformationalwellnessservices.com. And thank you for being our guest today, Linda.
You're welcome.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning into Herbally Yours, once again, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamhi, the Natural Nurse at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.